Hello, this is a video demonstration of xCAD.NET framework for developing CAD applications. We have recently released new version of xCAD.NET, and one of the biggest improvement is support of SolidWorks Document Manager. xCAD is CAD agnostic framework, which means that you can develop the same code base to be later used in different CAD systems. Although at the moment it only supports SolidWorks API and SolidWorks Document Manager API, we are planning to introduce more CAD systems in the future. Let me now quickly introduce you to high-level architecture of xCAD.NET. Base layer represents CAD-agnostic APIs. Those APIs do not refer to any specific CAD, rather they represent the common features of all CAD systems. All CAD systems will have high-level application object. You can open documents. There are usually three types of documents: parts, assemblies, and drawings, although they might be named differently in different CAD systems. 3D documents will have configurations, variants, or family tables, which all represents the different configurations of the same file. Documents and configurations will usually support metadata, which is the custom properties, and so on and so forth. And this is the main idea behind xCAD.NET, where all the common features and objects are stored in the abstract layer. This enables software developers to program applications which are not tied to specific CAD systems. Second layer of xCAD is a specific implementation of a base layer. So at the moment we support SolidWorks layer and SolidWorks Document Manager layer. In future, more CAD systems will be supported as well. The CAD-specific layer will contain an implementation of the base layer, but could also contain some CAD-specific features. In this demonstration, we are going to develop a properties reader application which can read custom properties from all files referenced by the selected assembly and display it in WPF data grid. Most of the functionality will be developed in the shared library, which is utilizing the base layer of xCAD.NET and using CAD-agnostic approach. Then we're going to implement two independent applications for reading the properties using SolidWorks API and using SolidWorks Document Manager API. And because the main business logic will be implemented in the base layer, we will not need to re-implement all the functionality for those two independent platforms. I will be writing the code from scratch with a slightly increased speed of the video. You can access the source code from GitHub by following the link in the description of this video. We'll start by creating a new class library project in C#, and we're going to implement CAD-agnostic logic of reading properties in this project. At first step, we'll need to add NuGet package for xCAD.NET. So for that, I just need to navigate Manage NuGet packages from the context menu in my project, go to Browse, search for xCAD, and I need to install xarial.xcad. Let me click this button, and it's going to install package and all the required references into my project. I want to point your attention that there is no SolidWorks specific references or any interrupts added into this project, because xarial.xcad is this base layer which contains only CAD agnostic interfaces. I have created properties reader service, and this service is going to be responsible for loading custom properties from the model. I have passed a pointer to IX application to its constructor, and this application corresponds to my actual CAD system. So for example, when I'm going to implement that for SolidWorks, it's going to be a pointer to SolidWorks, and for example for Document Manager, it's going to be corresponding to Document Manager application. I also want to close my CAD application when my application finishes, so I'm just going to implement iDisposable and close application in the dispose method. Let me create new method to read my properties, and it's going to be of type data table, so I can just easily bind it to my WPF grid view. I will start by creating a new variable of data table type, and it's going to contain all of my files and their corresponding custom properties. So first column is going to correspond to file path, so I'm just going to make it as a constant, so I'm not using magic strings. Next is I need to open my assembly and find all of the components, find all of their documents, and load properties from each of them. So I'm going to use OpenAPI on the documents collection. I just need to pass the file path to my file, which is a parameter of my read properties function. I can also specify some additional options, such as I want to open that assembly in read-only mode because I do not need to write anything back. I just want to read custom properties. Now it's time to find all of the components, and for that I'm just going to use an active configuration of my assembly and an extension method called flatten. So it's going to take components from all the level and represent them as one collection. As there can be multiple components referring the same parts, I'm just going to group them by path in order to eliminate all the duplicates. Finally, I will extract the document from one of my components in the group and cast this to array and assign to variable. So this variable is going to represent all of the reference documents of my assembly. Now we can iterate over the documents in order to load their properties. I'm just going to use a nested for each loop, where first loop iterates over documents and the second nested loop iterates over custom properties. Each custom property will be loaded into the corresponding column. So first I'm just going to check whether this column has been already created, and if so, I'm just going to use it. Otherwise, I'm going to create a new column where the name of this column is the name of my custom property. For each document, I will create a new row and I fill the first column of the file path with the corresponding path from my document. And each cell of my row in the properties column is going to contain the value of that property. We need to add each rows into our resulting table. In a similar way, you can load all the properties from the configurations, but as part of this demo, we're just going to load file-specific custom properties. When developing production application, most likely you will want to separate your user interface into a separate project. As a part of this demo, I will create my user interface elements in the same project. So I will start by creating a new view model, and this view model is going to hold pointer to data table, which I'm going to bind to data grid view. This view model will also handle opening the file, so it will display the file browse dialog where I can select my assembly, and it's going to load the properties from that. So I'm just going to create a I command, which is going to be browse assembly file command, which I will later bind to button. This application will allow to load different assembly in the same session. So I just need to make sure that I can notify WPF environment when my data table has been changed. For that, I'm going to implement iNotify property changed interface, and I'm going to raise property changed event every time my data table has changed. I'll just implement this logic within the setter of my properties table property. For simplicity, I'm going to implement file browsing functionality directly from my view model. I'm going to create onBrowse assembly file function, which is going to show file browse dialog. I will add another NuGet package from Xarial, which has a utility function to simplify file browsing dialog. Of course, you can implement your own file browsing functionality. Firstly, I'm going to initiate my command and link it to my onBrowse assembly file function. So every time a button is clicked, this command is invoked and the onBrowse assembly file function is called. Now let's implement the actual file browsing experience. For that, I'm just going to use file system browser helper function from Xarial toolkit, and it has browse file open, where I can specify the title, filter, and also the result of my browsing. I can build the filter using the another helper method. So in this case, I'm just going to allow selection of assembly files. Just need to specify the name of this filter and the extension, and will also add all files filter. If user clicked OK, this method is going to return true. So I just want to use my path file, which I'm going to use to load custom properties. Let me create an instance on my service, which I'm going to pass in my constructor. I will just assign the variable from my constructor into the read-only field of my class. So whenever user clicks the button, it's going to call onBrowse assembly file function, and then the file path to assembly is going to be passed into the read properties method of properties reader service. The resulting data table is going to be assigned to properties table property in my view model. Now it is the time to create user interface, which is going to serve this view model. I'm going to use WPF user control, so I just need to specify the name for that. So let's call it properties table control, And here I'm just going to create a simple grid with 2 rows, where the first row will contain a button which you click to select file to open, and the second row will contain the actual grid with all the properties. So the first button I'm going to call Open Assembly, and I'm going to use command property of that button and bind it to my browse assembly file command in my view model. The second row will contain data grid, and item source of data grid I'm going to bind to properties table of my view model. As I'm only going to allow read of custom properties, I will mark the data grid as read-only. So let's build the solution to make sure that it could be compiled. So let's quickly summarize what have been done in this part of the demo. We have implemented all the logic to load custom properties from all the reference documents of our assembly. We have also created a user interface and view model to serve those properties. And all of this has been done completely CAD agnostic. So we do not use SolidWorks API, we do not even refer any of SolidWorks interops or any of SolidWorks functions. So how that could work then? If you remember, we are passing the instance of IX application to our properties reader service. From that, we are simply using CAD agnostic APIs of that application to do the work. So now we'll just need to create an instance of our IX application for the specific CAD and pass it to our view model. And because we do not use any CAD specific APIs in our base project, we can create 2 different instances, one of SolidWorks API, one of SolidWorks Document Manager API, and pass it to view model, and in both cases we can use exact same code to generate same result. Let's see this in action. At first I'm going to create a new project in my solution, and it's going to be WPF application, which is an executable, and I'm going to call it as W properties reader. So this one is going to work directly with SolidWorks to read our properties. At first, let me add CAD specific version of XCAD. So I'm just going to install xerial.xcad.solidworks. So now you can see there are SolidWorks interops appeared in my project. We need to uncheck prefer 32-bit in the project options, otherwise the process will run a 32-bit application and it will be problems accessing SolidWorks from that process. So now we are ready to create our control and connect our view model. So the first step, let me add the reference to my properties reader project. Now I'm going to open my main window XAML file, and I'm just going to bring a namespace so I can add a control into my grid. So I'm going to call that namespace UI. I'm just going to browse properties reader. Here I can just use the namespace and select properties tab control. Let me activate the code behind, and here I can just create an instance of my view model and assign that to the data context of my window. View model expects properties reader to be passed in its constructor, so for now let me just declare this variable in my class, and I'm just going to instantiate this later. I will create a read-only field in my class, and I'm just going to pass the variable into my constructor of view model, and finally this view model is going to be assigned to the data context of a main window. I will override on closed event where I'm going to dispose my properties reader. Let's now create an instance of properties reader, and I need to pass an instance of an application variable here, and this is where I need to use CAD specific APIs. So I'm just going to call SW application factory, which allows me to create an instance of SolidWorks, or for example to connect to a running instance or run it from the pointer. So in this case I'm just going to start a new instance. I can select a version. If I do not pass a version, I'm just going to use the latest available. So now I can just pass that variable into my properties reader. If we now start our application, we can see how SolidWorks process is starting as well. And this is because we are calling the factory from the constructor. So I'm going to reuse the instance of that SolidWorks application in my properties reader. So let me click Open Assembly button, and I can just select my assembly, click Open, and as you can see, it is opening in the background in SolidWorks, and API is going to be called to read the properties from there and render into my data grid in my window. You can use some default features which data grid provides. So for example, you can scroll to see all the data here. You can click on the columns header to sort data in the columns. So as you can see, over 90% of the code has been used from our base DLL, which does not refer SolidWorks or any other CAD. And only one line, which is a SolidWorks specific, the one which is calling SW application factory create, which is actually running the instance of SolidWorks. So let's now continue and create another project. Now we're going to use SolidWorks Document Manager API to load the same properties. I will create another WPF application and call it SWDM Properties Reader. Just a brief introduction of what Document Manager is. Document Manager is a separate library provided by SolidWorks, allowing to access for read and write some metadata from your files. This library does not use SolidWorks API directly and provides to read and write information directly from the file streams, which means that you do not even need to open file in SolidWorks or even have SolidWorks installed to access this data. And the performance of this operation will be sometimes hundreds times faster than the equivalent of SolidWorks API. This library is free, but you need to have a SolidWorks subscription in order to receive the license key which is required by this library. Please follow the link in the description of this video for more information about Document Manager API. If you have ever developed application using SolidWorks Document Manager API, you may notice that it's using completely different API functions. So it is even using slightly different object model to SolidWorks API. And if you need to support both SolidWorks API and SolidWorks Document Manager API versions of your application, it will be two independent applications which need independent maintenance. And this is a problem which XCAD fixes, because we will be able to reuse the same code base to target two applications, for SolidWorks and for SolidWorks Document Manager. Let me continue and demonstrate that in action. I now need to perform similar steps and firstly install NuGet package. But instead of installing XCAD for SolidWorks, I'm going to install XCAD for SolidWorks Document Manager. So let me scroll down, and the package I'm looking for is xarial.xcad.sw Document Manager. So this is a SolidWorks Document Manager specific implementation of XCAD. So let me change the title of this window to differentiate two applications. So this one is going to be my SolidWorks Document Manager Properties Reader. I'm just going to copy some UI controls from my previous project because they're going to be the same. So let me just copy it here. And I'm also going to copy the namespace declaration and paste it into my new WPF project. Also, I will need to link my base properties reader to my WPF application for Document Manager Properties Reader. And also, I'm just going to copy the code behind from my SolidWorks implementation, and I'm going to slightly adjust it for my Document Manager version. Of course, I can no longer use SW Application Factory because SW Application Factory is for SolidWorks specific implementation. And I have SWDM Application Factory, which is a specific implementation for Document Manager. And the only parameter I need to pass to this method is the license key of Document Manager, which I have explained before. I'm just going to use my license key for Document Manager. And finally, I just need to disable prefer 32-bit to option in order to compile it as 64-bit application. So I can now start the debugging, and my breakpoint is going to be hit once application is compiled. The SWDM application factory will create an instance of Document Manager specific instance of IX application, which you can also pass to my properties reader service because it is CAD agnostic. So let me now activate the read properties function and debug it step by step to see how it works. So let me just click open assembly button and select the same assembly. So you can see the same routine can work. And now this instance of ISM is Document Manager instance of IX assembly document. So you can follow exact same procedure and fill the properties table. We can also inspect the values in our debugger. So this is something that's going to be displayed right now in our data grid. So you can see we have exact same data now displayed in the data grid, and I can also use the same manipulation with the columns as I did with SolidWorks version of Properties Reader. As I have mentioned before, one of the benefits of Document Manager is you do not need to have SolidWorks installed in order to execute its APIs. So here I have a new sandbox machine which doesn't have SolidWorks installed. I have only installed Document Manager SDK. You can use something like eDrawings, for example, which also installs Document Manager. So I'm just going to copy paste my files and click it from here. Now I can select assembly, so I already copied that to this machine, and you can see that all the properties are loaded even though I do not have SolidWorks installed on that machine. Thank you for watching this video.